This week, for all the Back to the Future fans out there, we jump in our time machine and find out what it'd be like to run a business in 1995. Welcome to the Profit Cash Growth Podcast. This is the podcast for 6- and 7-figure business owners who are looking to grow a financially successful business. My co-host, Claire Hancock, is a finance director, chartered accountant, and entrepreneur. And every week, I'll be exploring guidance and frameworks designed to help you increase your profits, improve your cash flow, and grow your business. I think Orangina is a really underrated drink, don't you think? One of those things that's always been around, but it's really nice, but it's never really hit the big time, I feel. Do you know
I think it's a bit like Appletiser.
Or Capri-Sun. They're always there in the background, but they never really do.
I really like when you go to a pub and you get a bottle of Orangina, like the textured bottle that it comes in. It's really nice.
Yes, it is. This week I've also been reading a lot about naming conventions with products, and what are you laughing at? I just thought this was really interesting. It's from it's a marketing book I'm reading from an advertising agency, and it's really just interesting how, like, I guess we know because it seems a bit obvious how, but right, by renaming and repositioning and reframing things, you can completely change the position of it. And some things I didn't know. So, for example, Chilean sea bass sells for $20 a plate, really expensive, but used to be called Patagonia toothfish. So you can see the difference why you would want to.
Yeah, no one wants to eat toothfish.
Have a exactly sea urchin or horse's eggs. They had to change the name of it. I wouldn't be eating horse's eggs, would you? But sea urchin just sounds majestic, doesn't it? Almost,
yeah. Not sure I'm down for either.
And even monkfish wasn't called monkfish; it was called goosefish. So
we see this a lot with like big brands, like the famous ones is like Vauxhall in the UK, but Opal in other countries, and
this must be
Walkers and Lays and all of those types of things. You see how these big brands do change the names of their brands and products, etc., for different marketplaces. It's very interesting.
Yes, it is. So I just thought it was interesting. Little fishy surprise for Friday. Anyway, come on, let's move on to this week's news story of the week. So, Claire, this is relevant to this week's deep dive, and it's not it's tenuous link, and it's not the most business-minded story. But I love Back to the Future. Back to the Future.
No, sorry.
What?
I think you can't just throw that comment in.
Right.
Like it's nothing. Like I love Back to the Future.
Yeah.
What?
So this week the story came out that Back to the Future DeLoreans have almost vanished from the UK. So this was statistics that came out from the DVLA to say that there is only 303 DeLoreans left in the UK out of the 9,000 that were produced in Northern Ireland back in the 80s.
I did suggest that we should swap our car for a DeLorean because it would be quite cool. And they're not actually that pricey. They're only about 50 grand, aren't they, to get like a road usable one? Well, but you then said that we wouldn't be able to park anywhere. You said, how are we going to get out of the car in Waitrose?
Because you couldn't actually get out of them if you park between two cars. You'd have to have a completely empty space in the car park with empty spaces on both sides to get the gull-wing doors open, because they're just, it's hard enough getting out of our car. You can't get the door open. The car parking spaces have got so small nowadays. It's crazy, isn't it?
Oh, I think I'm still quite agile though, so I could probably slide in and out the window. I'm not sure that you could, because you make all sorts of noises when you try and get out of the
Honestly, I'm not sure a
car.
1980s DeLorean window would still open though. So there is that. Yeah, they're so you can buy nice versions of them with sort of 20, 25,000 miles, because I have looked into it. You told me to, for about 50 grand, which I just thought was like, considering the cult status of them, I know they're not a good car. In fact, they're an awful car. But for the cult status of them and everything else, I feel like it's quite a good investment. I reckon that will do well in the next 20, 30 years. But the best one they had, the best example, only had 2,000 miles on it, was gleaming, was £82,000.
Do you want to know a nice little, to bring this back to remind everybody that I am an accountant, is that cars are capital gains tax free. So if we do buy one and it goes up in value.
You've taken a really exciting, really interesting Back to the Future / going back in time DeLorean, and then talked about tax.
Yeah, but I made it better. I just gave you another reason to buy one. Don't worry about where we're going to park.
I wonder if are they road tax free now, because they're over the number of years. I think it's 35 years where there's no road tax on them. So there is that benefit as well.
I think it's over 25 years you don't pay road tax.
They're completely made of stainless steel. So the bodywork is phenomenal on them. It's basically like having a cooker extractor hood with wheels, isn't it? I reckon it would turn more heads than a Ferrari, wouldn't it? Because it's completely
We do have a mini one, don't we? We have a little mini model version in our living room. And I have tried to throw that away so many times. Every time our nieces and nephews come round, and especially when they've been little kids, I've given it to them to play with.
Break the doors off, and it's really that one's not even made of stainless steel, but it feels like it's
and it's unbreakable, which I think might be a good sign for the actual DeLorean.
Exactly. Do you want to know another interesting stat?
No.
If you found a DeLorean that you could take back in time to 1981, you'd find that it was going for £18,000.
Bargain, absolute bargain.
Does that sound good to you?
Yeah. Right.
Where we're going, we don't need roads. Anyway.
What is this week's deep dive, Simon?
Yeah, let's find out. So, Claire, really interesting one this week. I wanted to go on a little journey back in time. I wanted to get out the DeLorean, get out the time machine, just keep this whole facade going for this podcast.
You've been drinking?
No.
It's like Sunday morning at 11 o'clock and I think you've lost your tiny little mind.
So, let me tell you what the theory of this is like. You hear this all the time. You hear the words, it's never been easier to start a business today. Is that fair? True?
I think it's never been easier to start a business.
Never been easier to start a business. The barriers to entry have never been lower, easier.
Look at how easy it is to list something on Shopify, get it on Amazon, eBay,
just need a laptop,
bake something and, go to your local market or, even now you just get orders on Facebook and you drive around and you deliver them. Loads of people do that with like cookies and brownies and things like that. Here, OnlyFans, another classic example. The gig economy,
classic example. Is that where you're setting up your business?
It's not the traditional business model that we're targeting, but you've got to argue it's a business. Some of these people are making serious bloody money on it. It's not the sort of industry that we'd go into, but the adult industry's been around for years and, some of them are making really good money on it. So it is a business. Yeah, I think it's never been easier to start a business.
Yeah.
But there is a difference between starting a business and running a business.
Or sustaining a business.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
Fair.
So I think that the polar argument to that I want to explore is that I think there is an argument to say that it's never been harder to make a good profit in a business and to sustain a business and stay open and all those good things. And I believe that the reason for that is due to change in taxation and, importantly, change in regulations. So I think for the purpose of this, we're going to use 30 years. I think that there is an argument to say that it's got more difficult at the end of everything you've done in your business to walk home with some profit or to have enough left in it to reinvest in your business, to grow it. And we're going to take a little
trip down memory lane.
Well, we're not. We're going to actually get in the DeLorean.
Well, not our memory.
I'm going to open the door now. Seat. I'm setting the clock for 1995. 8:30 a.m. and we're off. So what was the business environment back in 1995? Let's start with that. So corporation tax, which is the tax that you pay when you've actually made a profit. So the key to this is you've got to have actually made some profit. Now, in 1995, actually corporation tax was higher than it is today. And,
they had a pretty similar regime, actually, for profits, in that they had these two different rates, didn't they? So the main rate was 33%, but for very small businesses, well, I say very small, actually, this is probably quite a much bigger business than we appreciate. Actually, but for profits up to 300,000, which if you apply inflation...
would be nearly £1 million.
Would be nearly £1 million profit, you would only pay 25%.
25%. So not that generous, actually, to make £1 million. It's really rewarding big business there. You'd be turning over 10 million.
No, you could easily make £1 million profit on sort of like a few million turnover. For some businesses, not all businesses, but like a director-led businesses that are still running quite lean and don't have a management team. I think you could turn over sort of 2.5-3 million and make £1 million profit.
Mm. Can you introduce me to some of those businesses?
I'm not saying it's sustainable. I'm not saying it's sustainable, but
generally
I'm saying
I find it's 10% after if you take out your true cost of you and everything.
Okay, that's fair. But if you're taking dividends and you've got a couple of directors running the business, that's realistic.
Keep your top line. 33% corporation tax. So your corporation tax is actually higher. So if you make a profit in 1995, you're going to pay a bit more in corporation tax. Employers' national insurance, the rate was...
Sorry, I just wanted to say, what I found quite interesting is that they called that the small business rates. And even a business that, we're saying 5 million turnover potentially would make £1 million profit. Yep. That's 15 million in today's world. That even businesses up to 15 million are still classed in the government's eyes, still classed as small businesses.
Yep.
Whereas today, that's been eroded down to just 50k a profit.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So
yeah,
I think it's really interesting
crazy.
how this switch of what a small business is really sort of changed in the government's eyes.
That is a
who does and doesn't need support, I think, is kind
changing.
of what that headline message says to me.
Interesting. So employers' national insurance, a big tax on us all. We know if you employ people, and if you're a reasonable sized business, of course you're employing people. Mm-hmm. The rate in 1995 was 10.2% for earnings above £3,016. VAT.
Sorry, just on that NI thing as well, because what was really interesting was that there was an announcement in 1996, so just 1 year after this, and they introduced a law where you would get a 1 year national insurance holiday, so you pay no employer's national insurance if you employed somebody that had been unemployed for the last 2 years.
Interesting.
They called it a national insurance holiday, which I thought was quite interesting. And just to put that into...
What a great policy.
Yeah, just to put that into some context, with a rate of around 10%. So actually, I'll do this at the end. I've compared the same business then and today with the different numbers, but we'll do that at the end.
Yeah, that is literally...
That's the summary, isn't it? I got excited.
The purpose of the whole podcast. And I'll tell you now, skip the next 20 minutes. VAT. So VAT was 17.5% and they had a reduced rate of 8%. So again, 2.5% less than where we are now.
But the reduced rate higher, because the reduced rate today is 5%, and that generally people will see that on like utility bills and things like that.
Yeah. Pension obligations. So 1995, there was no statutory pension obligations on employers. So much more flexibility around that, and you didn't have to put a percentage of your employer's wages away. And the regulatory landscape generally, so I think there was fewer compliance regulations allowing businesses to focus slightly more on growth. There's definitely
no GDPR,
no argument.
No cybersecurity.
Yeah, we'll come on to
Information Commission Officer.
Yeah, we'll come on to those when we talk about
when
we need to get back in our time machine and go back to today.
Okay.
God, this is you're terribly structuring this podcast that I've lovely laid out in front of you here, Claire. So let's wind back forward, get back in the time machine. 2025. And let's get back to today and just recap, and we'll just recap to what it would have been in 1995. So today, your corporation tax, your main rate's 25%. So quite a bit less, 8% less. So heaven forbid you should actually make some profits today. You'll actually keep a bit more of them than you would have done in 1995. Employers' national insurance is now 15%. So a 50% increase on what it was in 1995. And the threshold is now at £5,000. So a little bit higher on the threshold. So a little bit better.
Well, higher from a numbers value. So the threshold in 1995 was £3,016, which I think inflation has been, I think, 3 times. So roughly just 3 times that number. That rate should be at 9,000. So actually, you could argue that
inflation has been 300% of that over 30 years.
I think so.
It probably is about. Yeah, you are about right. Yeah. So
you could argue that the last rate that we had of around £10,000 for the employers NI kicking in was actually a fairer rate, and Rachel Reeves has screwed us over and took us back to sort of around 2005.
I think we were aware that she screwed us over in every sense of the word, Claire. VAT is higher than it was. It's now 20%, so 2.5% more on you've got to be getting on your top line to just pay that straight up to the government. Pension obligations, we now obviously know that we have mandatory auto-enrolment requiring employers to contribute at least 3% of qualifying earnings, and we wouldn't be at all surprised, would we, if that went up in future to as high as probably 5% and continues to go, because it's still not enough to supplement or to replace the state pension, which is ultimately what I think they're probably aiming to do in 30 years' time. Regulatory changes. So we've had the Data Protection Act of 2018. We've had the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act of 2024. We've had environmental regulations. We've had the Employment Rights Bill that's about to come in shortly as well, which is going to make things difficult. We've had the ICO, the International Commissioner's Office. We've had AML. That's become very, very strict anti-money laundering for those companies that require that. And I'm sure in each of your individual industries, there'll be a plethora of
like a big one at the moment is the plastics packaging tax. So
sugar tax.
Sugar tax. Also, maybe not so applicable to small businesses, but the employment levy for bigger businesses.
I mean, don't forget IPT, insurance premium tax. Now, insurance premium tax, I saw the other day, is now generating something like £10 billion a year. I mean, it's gone from not a tax to just insane. And we're all paying that as consumers. So
it's absolutely insane.
But you as a business need to administer that. So again, clearly impacts on businesses from that perspective in terms of, all those different things that are kicking in. So competitive analysis, Claire, what do we think?
Wow. So I took a business and I said, okay, so if we had like a £5 million business today, what would the equivalent be back in 1995? So I took a £5 million business and I assumed that, we've got to put a flag in the ground somewhere for comparison purposes. But I said roughly 50% of its turnover goes in cost of sale, another 25% goes in overheads, and then they've got employment costs on top of that. So I estimated that they'd have 25 employees because that's a pretty average sort of £5 million business. Obviously, it does vary industry to industry. So headline numbers, turnover, 4.9 million now would be equivalent to 2 million back in 1995.
Okay.
So that sort of gives you some statistics on that. 25 employees. Yeah. The average wage in 1995 was 15,000. It's 37,000 now. So that gives you a difference in just pure salary.
We've not even talked, have we, about the increase in the forced increase in minimum wage by hundreds of percent. That again is arguably another cost to the business and tax to the business.
So, well, that's the average wage, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really?
No, it's not actually, as we've proved it, because if your business is skewed towards minimum wage labour, you're going to
you're going to have a much higher workforce
we talked about wage compression last week, didn't we?
So you're looking at a payroll cost of just for salaries alone of 376,000 versus 930,000. Okay, but staggeringly, your national insurance bill, your 10% versus your 15% with the employer's NI is going to be. I worked it out to be roughly about £20,000 employers' national insurance back in 1995 versus 135 national insurance now.
Wow.
So that is huge.
So that's the stealth. That's the stealth
5 times higher
working person's tax that's been taken in a different way through the back door through businesses over those 30 years. It's staggering.
And then you've got pension. Obviously there was. I know we say, people back in 1995 would have had pensions, and it's fair to say the people that did have pensions were probably more generous because we were still in the day of quite a lot of employers still offering final salary pensions and things like that, defined benefit pensions,
small
they were
businesses
known as.
I wasn't around this. I guess small businesses wouldn't.
Well, you were around, just to clarify.
No, but would they? I wasn't in the business, but would a small a £1 to £10 million business offer defined benefit pensions for people? Or was that just a big business thing back in the day?
I think it would have varied. I think definitely we were on this transition away from these defined benefit pensions anyway. So a lot of businesses would have been ahead of the curve and perhaps has just never offered them. But there was still a mixture because it was pretty standard that this is what the pension companies offered. So, we've got minimum pension contributions of 3% now, which, if your salary cost is 930, well, that's a huge cost in your business, isn't it? Because it's another, £10,000 just in pension costs.
Yeah.
Which, okay, on a £5 million business, £10,000 is neither here nor there, but it's just another thing that adds up, isn't it? Versus zero back in 1995.
Yeah.
And then we looked at corporation tax. So roughly a £2 million business is going to be left with about 150k profit.
Yeah.
Once it's paid all of its costs. So what was the corporation tax rate? So they would have been paying 25% corporation tax
today, but 33 in 1995.
No, because they would have been under the small.
Oh right, okay, yeah.
Under the small.
Oh yeah, because it was very generous, the small business.
Yeah. So what did I say? 150k. So they would have paid about 37.5k in tax overall, which meant roughly they would have paid about 50k in total in taxes to the government in that year on £2 million business.
And I guess that corporation tax is not really that relevant to this conversation because our conversation is about, is it harder to make a profit? And corporation tax happens after you made a profit anyway. So really, we're really honing in on all of those taxes and challenges and regulations that make it harder for businesses to even make that profit, to even be charged the corporation tax on the end. So your summary is that, yes, it's harder?
Well, to put this in comparison...
What are we talking? How much more margin do you need in your product?
To put this in comparison, a £4.9 million business, if roughly 50% of it goes on cost of sale, another 25% of it goes on overheads, and then you've got your payroll costs to come off of there. So you're down 75% would be 1.25, less your payroll costs, which we've said are your 930k and roughly 150k in pensions and national insurance, etc., etc. You're actually only going to be left with about 100k to pay tax on.
Right. Given that this is an absolutely horrible audio experience, can you just tell me, is it harder for business owners now or is it easier?
Yeah, I think it is way harder. I think some things are harder and some things are easier though, because we look at the average wage and actually
to make a profit, is it easier or harder? That's the only question here. Is it easier to make a profit? Because to have a sustainable business, you need to make a profit. And actually, to have a really sustainable business, you need to make surplus profit, because half your profit needs to go back in investing into the business itself. So
I would argue that it has, take taxes out of it, because I don't think that taxes makes or breaks businesses, because I've worked with businesses around the world, and all different countries have all different tax regimes, particularly in Europe. Business taxes are far higher. There are far more taxes than we have here. And businesses are successful there. So I don't necessarily think that the tax regime makes or breaks businesses.
Are they? You never hear about, I mean, European countries are not particularly on the radar, are they, as being great?
Okay, well, take it, go into
what I mean? So
a
you
country,
say it's a successful
country like Austria, for example. You've got something called the 13th and 14th holiday payments, and that means that
nobody talks about Austria, do they? Ever.
Okay, but this is really common across Europe, that you don't just give employees pay time off. They get,
I get it.
A 13th and 14th month of their salary. So you're not paying somebody 12 months of salary, you're paying them 14 months.
But that's just the equivalent of a bonus here, isn't it? I mean,
you have to give them 2 years maternity leave.
Yeah, it's just a bonus.
Like, all of these things go into it. In Belgium, they have to pay something called eco-checks to their employees, which are basically vouchers to help their employees be green.
I don't like the comparison to European countries, because they're not even on the agenda. No one cares about them. They're not leading the world's charge. They're not great entrepreneurial places to set up businesses, and this is why. So I don't think that's helpful to compare to them. Do you know what I mean?
What are you referring to when you're saying that? You're talking about America, China,
Germany.
Germany. Well, Germany's got high taxes.
Yeah,
actually.
it does. Relative, but not like France and Belgium.
Yeah,
they're screwed their country.
Okay, America. I feel like America needs to be taken out of it, because I'm on a bit of a reading sort of blitz at the moment, aren't I? No, but I'm on a bit of a reading blitz at the moment. I've been reading something called The Rise of the Bean Counter, which is about how the big four accountancy firms have been dominated by America. And now I'm reading something called The Vassal State, which is about how America owns Britain. And I think over the generations, America has accumulated such ownership of businesses around the world and such control of the world that I just feel like you can't look at America and say the taxes are the reason why this country is successful. It's not. It's because it's had this sustained buy-up of the rest of the world.
Their taxes aren't that good anyway, so it's not even about the taxes, is it? Canada.
I think in a business today with
Australia,
when you embrace technology and you're intelligent and you educate yourself and you go into running a business like it's a skill and not just something that you turn up and do every day because you don't fancy getting a job, I think it's very easy to be successful. Because, take, for example...
Define very easy? Because I think we're all those things. I wouldn't say that either of us find it very easy.
I don't find running a business any harder than having a job. That's for sure. I don't know, but did you find having a job easier or harder than running a business?
Yeah.
What? Yeah, what?
Yeah, it's a lot harder running a business. A lot harder.
Being an
employee. Far more
anxiety,
far more like trying to, the burden of meeting people's mortgages every month, the burden of, not being able to pay yourself so you can pay everyone else and things like that. It's completely different to being an employee. Employee's got no anxiety at all. Every month my pay dropped in and I didn't even think about it.
Maybe it's the type of role, the difference of working in like a commercial role versus, like a finance role. But I tell you, I didn't really sleep properly my entire adult life until I left my job. Really, because I was just constantly worried, have I paid everybody? Have I submitted all the right tax returns? Are all the taxes paid? Are all the employees paid? Are all the suppliers paid? Is there any fraud going on? Like, that was just constantly in my mind 24/7. So actually, I find running a business...
Is that just because you were managing a bigger business than you're managing now?
Yeah, potentially. But I think with technology available, it's never been easier to acquire customers, to sell things, to digitise things, for things to happen 24 hours a day without us making that much effort to make it happen. Whereas back in 1995, we've got to think about
what paper-based still.
Yeah, paper-based. Where the internet was only launched in 1996, was it?
Internet's 40 odd years old now.
1986.
It didn't really start to kick in until then. Yeah.
So I think in 1995 we might have got our first computer in our house as well.
Well, I think there's a million other arguments as to why we should be the most profitable that we've ever been, because technology, productivity, all those type of things. But it seems to have been completely eroded. And that's, again, we talked about productivity. Why has productivity been zero? How can it be zero? You look at the world is a different place in 20 years, but business is zero productivity. And That's bizarre, isn't it? And we need that productivity to pay these taxes, to build these margins, and we're not there, and we're not where we need to be. It's a strange one, isn't it? But
personally, I think productivity is almost entirely down to people. They really make the difference. It's people that are designing the algorithms and the software and implementing things that give you those efficiency gains over somebody doing something productive.
They need to sack themselves to be able to make the company productive.
I think, unfortunately, people are the blocker. Yeah. Like, we've become obsessed with work-life balance and this sort of notion that we can go through life without really having to put much effort in and yet still get paid.
Yeah, possibly.
And I think that's the big issue. But one of the things that stuck out the most for me was the average wage, 15,000 in 1995 and 37,000 today. So
we talked about that last week, didn't we?
Yeah, but it's not three times. Would it be? It should be 45,000 today. Is the logic behind that? Is my point to that. So actually, I expected average wages to be higher, and I was quite surprised that it hadn't kept up with inflation.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Simon?
I think
harder or easier?
I don't think it's easier, but I don't think it needs to be as hard as we perhaps make out it is if we embrace those tools that are available to us that weren't available 30 years ago and wholeheartedly embrace them and implement them in our business and, look for the best suppliers, look for the best technology, make sure that we're looking for the best people. We're not holding on to dead wood. We're moving quick. We're hiring fast, hiring slow and firing fast. And, all those things. I think the tools are there. I just think people aren't great at change. And, I meet people who are still running their business like they were 20 years ago. And they've not unlocked the benefit of what's happened in the last 20 years. And that, I think, is what's missing.
One of the things that I'm thinking about some of the customers I'm working with, and I've probably got 5 or 6 different businesses that we're working with that are currently going through that transition of parents handing the business over to the younger generation. And actually, something that is quite common across probably 4 out of 6 of those businesses is the parents say, we're not the ones to take the business forward. When our kids know far more than us, our kids are better at this than we ever were and things like that. But I look at it and I think the kids are struggling so much. Not struggling, that's probably not the right word to say. The kids can't do it on their own. The parents did it on their own. They built this business and it's got to multi-million pounds for all of the 5 or 6 businesses that I'm working with. It's multi-million pound businesses that we're talking about that have been handed down to the generation, but the kids can't do it on their own. The kids now need external consultants. They need somebody like me in there helping them. Like, they're on all these courses, they're in all of these mastermind groups, they listen to podcasts, they've got YouTube. The parents just did it. They just thought and they did it. And they didn't necessarily have any super skills or anything like that. So maybe there is something to say it was easier back then.
I never really thought about it like that. If you take out all the things that we have available to absorb, to educate us, to help us, partner with us, and all those kind of things that invariably weren't there in 1995, actually, that bloody well would be an anxiety-ridden journey to go on your own, wouldn't it? Starting a business in 1995.
Yeah, why?
I guess people networking would have been more prolific. I guess you would have met with other businesses. You would have met face to face to share and learn and do those things.
Would you?
A lot more. I think you would have. I think you would have had to. What else are you going to do?
I think the one thing that has changed is the competitive environment, hasn't it? Because,
if you're listening to this and you set up your business in 1995, drop us a note, marketing@profitcashgrowth.com. Exactly what did you do? What were the processes you took? What did it feel like? We'd love to shout you out on the podcast and just to go through that exactly what that felt like compared to what people are approaching it now.
Do you know what? In fact, we should do this podcast again with like the parents and the children about how they approached running the business in 1995, and we'll talk about how they do it today and see where the difference is, because I don't think it comes down to taxes. I don't think that's why it's hard.
No, I mean, the reality is that a good entrepreneur business person just takes the challenges and just navigates and builds around them. They don't, when a wall's built in front of them, they don't crash straight into it. They work a way around it, don't they?
Yeah.
That's the reality.
I mean, just to summarise, in terms of taxes, I worked out that a business pays roughly about 9 to 10% of taxes of its turnover goes in taxes of just national insurance and corporation tax, because they're the two that have really changed. And actually in 1995, I worked it out to be 9% as well. So that number has not changed significantly, and I think that it's actually the same.
Right. Well, interesting chat. And I'm pleased I got to use the DeLorean all day long. So you can't even begin to imagine what's going to be in this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra, can you?
No, I actually can't.
No. So in this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra, it's the film Back to the Future What? No, I'm joking. It's not. This week, I've gone back to basics, and this may sound really strange, but I've never really used the Notes app on my phone, and I've just brought it, and it's only because I buried it in the back of the apps, but I brought it to the homepage of my phone. I've started to really use the Notes app, and what's made it really, really helpful and easy is I've started to use the dictation part of the Notes app in Apple, and do you know what? It's really good. And for some reason in my head, I just thought it was going to be rubbish. And when I dictated something, it wasn't going to write it right. It was going to get the words wrong and all the rest of it. And do you know what? It was just really, really good. It just wrote it exactly as it is. So now I'm using the notes, and I can set up different folders in the notes. I've got one for the podcast for bits of ideas. I've got one for one company, one for another company, one for quotes that I like. And every time I just see something, I just stick it in the Notes app there, and I can just dictate it in. And I'm quite enjoying using that process at the moment.
Do you know what's bizarre about that is you use voice to text on WhatsApp. We use it transcribing the podcast. We use it an AI thing to add text over the shorts to our podcast, but yet you thought that Apple dictation wouldn't do it.
Wouldn't be that good. And do you know why? Because Siri's rubbish. So I think I'd assume that I assumed all the Apple stuff when it comes to that kind of technology is really rubbish. Whereas to go on ChatGPT and the voice to dictation is absolutely spot on. It's perfect. But yeah, do it with Siri. It's like going back 10 years ago, the voice thing. You have to say it 3 times. And did you mean this? No, I didn't mean that. Did you mean this? And so it's not that great. That's why I don't use Siri. But So it doesn't have to be Apple Notes, but Notes app. I don't know. What do you guys do? But that's my little Profit Cash Growth for the week.
Myself, voice notes.
I do that as well. I do loads of different things, but Notes seem to be, these are for more like trivial things like the shit chat that I want to talk to Claire about at the beginning of the podcast, that kind of thing. Anyway, thanks for joining us in another podcast. If you feel like you may have outgrown your current accountant and you'd like to work with Claire and the team at Profit Cash Growth, you can nip over to the website profitcashgrowth.com. On there, book a discovery call, have a chat with the team. And as always, please rate, review and subscribe to the podcast, and do have a listen back to any of the episodes. They're all very evergreen, and there's definitely something you can learn from every single one of them. And just drop this one over to a friend of yours who owns a business and say, hey mate, you're definitely going to like this one. And hopefully the mate set his business up in 1995. We'll see you again next week.